Welcome, and thank you for joining for another whiskey review. Today, we're going to take a look at the Balvenie 17-year-old Peated Cask, 43% ABV. Balvenie Peated Cask. I have had this bottle for at least 4 years, and I've been meaning to bring it to you guys for quite some time. I was planning to try to get a few more of these special release 17-year-olds and kind of bring them to you in a series. Unfortunately, I was not able to. So let me tell you a little bit about these 17-year-old special releases. If you're a fan of Balvenie, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the 17-year-old Doublewood. But back in, I believe, 2001, they came out with these yearly special 17-year-old releases. Back in 01, it was the Isla Cask, and then there was a New Oak. There's 6 of them. There's an Isla Cask, there's a New Oak, there's a Cuban Cask. There's a few of them. Anyway, the 17-year-old Peated Cask is the only one I was actually able to ever get my hands on. And this was released back in 2010. I want to say I bought it in 2014. I didn't open it for a while. And then when I did open it, it wasn't really my favorite. So I kind of let it sit open with just a few drams out of it for probably a year and a half or so. And I kind of went back to it. I shared it with friends and actually put it in my basement where I put generally bottles that I had finished. But I also kind of put bottles that I had multiples of. And for whatever reason, I kind of just misfiled it. You know, you have a problem with whiskey when you have so many of them. You misfiled where you put a bottle of whiskey. But I was cleaning some things up probably 5 or 6 months ago. I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot this was where the Peated Cask was. So brought it upstairs, put it in my pantry, and I'm excited to bring it to you guys now. So to tell you a little bit about this 17-year-old Peated Cask, this is how it was created by Balvenie. And in case this is the first time you're watching a whiskey review on my channel, or if you're new to Scotch whiskey, Balvenie is a single malt Scotch whiskey distillery owned by William Grant & Sons, who also owns Glenfiddich. So that means this is a Speyside distillery. I believe they got the Balvenie name, and I've done plenty of Balvenies on this channel, probably 8 or 9. I don't know if I've ever told you that I think there was like a Balvenie farm that William Grant & Sons bought after they'd already established Glenfiddich to essentially make sure that distilleries didn't go right around them. So they bought an extra, for some reason I have the figure of 12 acres in my head, that was like a Balvenie castle and a Balvenie farm. And initially they didn't produce, but at some point they built a distillery, started producing, and essentially it's the higher end Glenfiddichs. If you know anything about single malt Scotch whiskeys, Balvenie is a very well respected whiskey, mainly because Dave Stewart kind of oversaw the distillery for some period of time before he retired. If you don't know who Dave Stewart is, he was, I believe, one of the longest standing people in the whiskey making industry. He spent 50 years or 50 some years with William Grant & Sons, and really is a master as far as different cask maturations, double finishes, like the double wood. And this is in that same spirit, not a similar process, but in that same spirit. So kind of let me tell you how this worked. What Balvenie did was they had distilled actually smoky whiskey. They distilled a peated whiskey. This is not distilled peated whiskey. This is whiskey that was just put into a peated cask. So I want to make that distinction extremely clear. So unlike, say, like the Peat Week 14-year-old that Balvenie currently has out now, this is not peated barley. What they did was this. They made peated barley, created a peated whiskey, and then they put that into a cask for 10 years. Then they made their standard whiskey, unpeated, that being, put it in a traditional bourbon, mature or ex-bourbon cask for 17 years. Now, when they say traditional cask, that means it's a refill cask. Usually, in my opinion, means it's a second fill, but I guess it could be a second, third, or fourth fill. So they had this 17-year-old traditionally matured whiskey that was unpeated, like they would, say, in the 17-year-old Doublewood. And then they took that whiskey and put it in the barrels that previously had peated Balvenie whiskey in it. And they dumped out that peated whiskey, and they kept that cask that held the peated whiskey and then filled 17-year-old unpeated whiskey into that barrel and did a finishing period for what I've been able to read was 6 to 9 months. So unpeated Balvenie put into a peated cask using peated Balvenie whiskey for a finishing period of 6 to 9 months. So this whiskey is close to 18 years old. If that is confusing, it was confusing to say. Rewind. I'm sure I said it correctly. All right, here we go. Balvenie, 17-year-old peated cask. Let's take a look at the color. I believe it is a colored whiskey, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Looks like Balvenie 17-year-old double wood, or one of the other ones like that, or the Caribbean cask or something. Just basically a caramel color. I'm going to give it a quick smell. Again, this is 43% ABV. Okay, and this one has always been something that I had a super high expectation for because I love super peated whiskeys and I love Balvenie. And I thought the marriage of the two was just gonna be magic. I remember when I found this bottle, I was so excited. It wasn't cheap, it was 175 bucks or something. And then, as I told you before, my first drink of it, I was a little bit disappointed, but since then it's really opened up. And recently, you can see the fill level is very low. I've been drinking it down from here the last few months just to really get to know it before I brought it to you guys. And as I will do sometimes, I loved a little too much, and I had to put it on camera here before it was all gone. So let's go back to the nose. Let's pick up some of the flavors. If I haven't mentioned it before, it's a 43% ABV whiskey. So the first thing I'm really picking up on the nose is a nice, light, subtle peat. And I mean, it's subtle. And I guess that's probably what threw me off initially was I expected to be more peaty on the nose. But that's not it at all. It's a nice, light, subtle peat. And then you get that nice Balvenie honey, vanilla. It's very sweet on the nose, which sweet and peat, sometimes that works extremely well. Sometimes it doesn't work as well. I've had sweet peated whiskeys that I really enjoyed. I've had ones that I really didn't enjoy. But this one here, it really hits a nice middle spot. And really, that's probably why I was expecting overwhelming peat. This is not overwhelming peat. It's very, very lightly peated. And really, as I kind of worked through this bottle and corrected my initial thoughts or my initial expectations that it was going to be a really, really smoky Balvenie. Instead, I got this lightly smoked Balvenie. It really is better this way because you still get that Balvenie sweet honey, sweet vanilla characteristics that in a heavily peated whiskey would have probably been just usurped by all of that heavy, heavy smoke. And that's not what it is all. It is really a nice balance. Yeah, vanilla, smoke, maybe a little bit of citrus too, like just a slight twinge of orange. And it's so subtle, just with all of its flavors. It's a light peat, but peat's probably the strongest smell in here, but it's very light. And that lovely Balvenie honey, and that lovely vanilla. Now, as far as flavors on the nose, I'm only picking up 4 or 5 things, period. I mean, again, honey, vanilla, smoke. There's a sweetness like a sweetness of wood almost. And again, with a well-aged whiskey, which this is, I mean, it's at least 17 years old, probably pushing 18 years old. It's very sweet oak, I guess is the best way to say it. You can tell it was in a bourbon cask for a long time. Now, as I'm kind of smelling, and this is something that has been consistent through this bottle, the peat swords subsides. It kind of takes a step back, and those traditional Balvenie flavors are coming through. All right, first sip time. Well, the peat is not subtle on the palate, man. It is peat forward on that palate. This is a whiskey that the smell and the taste, even though the flavors are consistent, just what you would expect on the palate based on the nose is so drastically different. It's one of these, the first time you really taste it, if you're lucky enough to get a taste of this bottle, you'll say to yourself, I wasn't expecting that on the palate. And that's exactly what this is. It is very, very peat forward. So smoky. Smoked honey. A little bit of meaty quality to it as well. I would say almost like a barbecue sauce with that smoke and that honey. Peat, vanilla, honey. The same flavors that were on the nose, but just really, really intensified on the palate. This one is something that, if you like peated whiskeys and you like Balvenie, you think you have a good idea of what this whiskey is going to offer you, and you're going to be surprised. This one really kind of stepped just a few steps outside the boundaries of what I traditionally would expect from either Balvenie or from a peated whiskey. It's really a unique piece of work. And something that, back in 2010, I wouldn't expect anything less, from something from Balvenie. They really make extremely quality whiskeys. They pretty much everything they put out is an enjoyable whiskey. I've never really disliked any Balvenie I've ever tried. Probably my least favorite would be the 12 single barrel, but it was just a bitter whiskey that I just, really wasn't my style. But Balvenie will put out quality. And this one was not something that was just thrown together last minute as something that's gimmicky or, as some distillers would do with their yearly releases, just something thrown together just to generate some interest that they could sell at a higher price and make some profit off of. This one is really a very well crafted whiskey that's going to give you an experience that you weren't expecting, because there is really no whiskey like this. I have had the 14-year-old Peat Week. They are different than this Peated Cask. The Peat Week is very much more peat forward than this on the nose, but on the palate, it's not as strong as this on the palate for the Peated Cask. I don't know if they get it from the age. I don't know if they got it because they heavily peated the whiskey that was in the barrel before they put in the 17-year-old whiskey, but it is just almost a shock the first time that you have a sip of it compared to what it was like on the nose. All right, so I threw a little bit of water into it. We're gonna see how it changed it up. Sometimes water will bring out the peat smoke, and sometimes it will subdue it and bring out some of the other flavors. This is the latter. A little bit more subdued, definitely with water. Getting that sweet honey, that sweet wood. It's almost like if you had a stave of the wood and you put icing on it and you smelled it. That's kind of what it smells like with water. And when I say icing, I'm of course saying a sugary vanilla, I think is probably a better way to put it. Yeah, but it's almost like you dried out the barrel, you got a stave, you put cake icing on it, and then it's just that oak and cake icing, that vanilla, that sugar, with that charred oak and slight peatiness. And I say slight peatiness because it was light initially. It's even lighter now that I put a little bit of water into it. And I'm sure on the palate will be something different. So let's see what the second sip with water will do for us. Smoke's still there, but it is definitely taking a step back with water. Honey, vanilla, like a sugary sweetness that wasn't there before I put the water in. So this is one where I really can't tell whether or not I like it better with water or without. I've gone back and forth. I guess it kind of just hits you on the day. If you're in the mood for a little bit more dessert, put a little bit of water in it. If you're in the mood for a little bit stronger of a peat, say it's fall time or it's your last dram of the night, you might want to try this one out neat. It is 43%, so it's not a huge ABV, probably chill filtered, but just a really, really unique, delightful whiskey. As far as a whiskey score, again, I'm gonna give a score that if you've been a fan of my channel, you might say, well, that's low, and that score's gonna be an 88. But anymore, a good solid 88 out of 100 is a solid whiskey, in my opinion. This one here, besides being a solid whiskey and having a lot to offer, it is an extremely unique experience. If you like Balvenie, if you like peated whiskey, it's not gonna be what you think. but it might be what you love. And I guess that's really what's the most important thing. Anyway, I'm an 88 out of 100. If anyone's been lucky enough to have this peated cask, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I've waited forever to bring you this review, so I've had a lot of oxidation in this bottle. It's as good now as when I went back to it 4 or 5 months ago when it was about half filled. And really, it's almost a, I don't know, a stroke of luck that I kind of put it away and forgot about it for a little while when I was first starting up my whiskey channel. As far as the whiskeys that I wanted to get through, I don't know if I would have appreciated as much as I do now. So I'm glad my palate has evolved to the point to where I can recognize this for the true, I don't want to say masterpiece, but the true unique piece of whiskey history that it is. Again, they made it 1 year back in 2010. They hit here in the States around 2013. I picked it up in 2014 at a shop that just had a couple of left over. Really happy about that. Getting 88 out of 100. I want to thank you again for once again joining for another whiskey review. Hope you guys found it interesting. Hope I stoked your passions for this whiskey. If you can find it anywhere, either on the secondary market or if you're lucky enough to find it on some dusty shelf somewhere. But until next time, I wish you happy drinking, and I look forward to talking to you in the comments section. See you then.